hang in there with us too, if you would, Troy, for those questions. They've been rolling in, and just a reminder to everyone, keep those questions rolling in to our speakers, Nicole and Troy. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, coming all the way from North Carolina, from New Mexico to North Carolina. Jeff Young is with us today, and I'm going to give the give over the presentation over to Jeff and have him take us through a few of North Carolina's programs. So let me make you the presenter, Jeff. That should mean that you would be able to share your material up on the screen with us.
All right, well, thank you, Ray, and good morning. First, I'd like to express my gratitude for the opportunity to share a few things that are going on in North Carolina with regards to conservation employee development and training. I'd like to touch on about three things this morning. The first being our new employee orientation. The second is our professional conservation employee plan. And lastly, our state or development of a state job approval authority system. First of all, our new employee orientation is usually offered in the spring. This will be our 5th year when we offer it this May. This is open to all conservation partnership employees, but the vast majority of our attendees are district employees. But we try to take the opportunity to, as the name implies, just give them sort of a foothold on some of the processes, background, and the interrelationship of conservation in our state. You see, we discuss things like open meetings law and the Freedom of Information Act, and talk about our cost share programs. Additionally, we give instruction on just how they can help be a leader in their district, outreach, and like I said, the inner workings of our partnership. It's a 1.5-day event. The second day, we actually break our groups up into the technical group and those folks that are more tasked with administrative duties, and work through those. Let's see if I can get this thing to advance. And you can see in the technical session that we're talking about the individual development plans, getting them familiar where to find NRCS standards, and working with our own state Soil and Water Conservation Commission standards. Kind of introduce them the concept of job approval authority and the process by which they request technical assistance, either through the state resources or even federal. And then on to the administrative session, where it's a lot of the accounting and paperwork on just doing district supervisor reimbursement, as well as they do employee development plans and training templates, and discuss their district resources. And a lot of those same individuals have environmental education duties, so there is a portion devoted to it, and also marketing their services and social media. And this has been really successful. There's about 250 district employees in North Carolina, about 50 of the state partnership employees, and just over 100 in NRCS. But you can tell just from usual attrition that we don't have a problem with having a full classroom each year of 25 to 35 individuals, and it's been hugely successful. So we as the state partner sort of organize it, but you can tell from the criteria or the subject matter on the agenda that it's a cooperative effort between all our partnerships, between the federal, local, and state. And it's now that we're in our 5th year, it's one of those resources that districts and other managers of conservation employees have come to depend on, and they look for it, and they also inform their new hires that that's something that they're expected to attend, because it is becoming sort of a linchpin of the or starting off point for a lot of our conservation employees in North Carolina. The second thing I want to talk about was the professional conservation employee plan. This is something that was developed about 10 years ago, and basically a number of committees were formed to tailor a development plan for the different I guess you want to say disciplines in conservation that involves the technical staff, administrative staff, educational, and even managerial. So there were separate committees for each one of those, and they were charged with developing a plan for that conservation employee or partner. And it was supposed to have milestones saying what the expectations were, say after 6 months, after a year, 2 to 5 years, 2 to 3 years, and then at 5 years. And all those are on our website, which I have pulled up right now. But I'll toggle over to one of those forms here in just a minute. But the biggest benefit of having those, and I think this may be of interest to some of the people participating today, is they can compare notes of either what they have, or if they're looking to do something similar, they can certainly look at what came out of those committees in North Carolina. But it gives you a good framework, so district boards of supervisors can basically kind of gauge the development and help implement plans for their own staff on training and professional development. Also for managers within that district office, if they have subordinates that are coming on, they also have sort of a roadmap, and it's expected that these plans are to be tailored for each district and each employee, but it sort of gives everybody a basic framework from which to work from. So what does one of those look like? I'm pulling up now just the one for the technical, and while it starts off a background, I'll get down to what probably folks are most interested in. So a suggested timeline as it comes up, but you can see with our technical staff in 6 months, it's just kind of understanding where they fit in the conservation partnership and just sort of the ins and outs of working within that office and some of the general statutes, as well as sort of like what they learned at the new employee orientation, Freedom of Information Act, things, how to hold public meetings, things of that nature. But at 1 year, you can see with at least technical staff, there's a expectation for them to at least have the ability to evaluate maps, topographical maps, as well as use some software tools and begin taking on responsibilities of design. In 2 years, there's expectation to be proficient in a lot of those same fields, to be a contributing member of the team. And you see it goes all the way out to 3 to 5 years. And you see the sort of type things that are expected of that. And so it's been valuable for, like I said, the districts and folks that are bringing on new people. We have people that adhere to these closely, and others have gone off and tailored them for their own needs, especially those that have more urbanized soil and water conservation districts. But again, it's just sort of a launching point, which folks can use as a resource to help guide the development of their employees. And all those 4 different disciplines, the managerial, administrative, technical, and educational, are on our website, and they're available to anybody to use as like I said, either as comparison or a way of launching their own type similar plan. Last thing I wanted to touch on today was job approval authority. While everybody's aware of the NRCS job approval authority, and we too have been relying on it for decades. But in North Carolina, the Association of Soil and Water Conservation Districts, at their annual meeting in January 2019, directed us to develop a state job approval authority system. Basically, in North Carolina, we have had a state job approval authority system which augments the NRCS. Our Soil and Water Conservation Commission in North Carolina has its own state-funded cost share programs, and some of those programs have grown and diversified enough that there are practices which appear in our cost share programs, which is not a recognized practice in NRCS. So the Commission, recognizing this, developed their own practices and practice standards and policies and their job approval authority system, so that they can grant to partnership employees these practices that aren't necessarily or not part of the NRCS field office tech guide, and allows the Commission to grant that. And so it's been, like I said, an augment to the NRCS system, but just through the needs of the districts, and it came through the resolution process, but we were directed to expand that now to include typical conservation practices that are offered by NRCS. The feeling of the districts and the association was basically that we could tailor the job approval authority system to make them more nimble and tailor it to a training program, because a lot of times with NRCS, just because of the extent and vast array of their conservation practice standard, the training requirements and availability of them has limited the effectiveness of some of the districts to get conservation on the ground. So we're in the midst in North Carolina of trying to implement an expanded job approval authority system, which includes a lot of the practices that are already in the NRCS JAA system. It's basically been a three-pronged approach. We have authorizing legislation that was before our General Assembly this last session. It was part of a Farm Act, which had some more controversial components having to do with hemp and smokable hemp. So last year, no action was taken on that Farm Act, but when the General Assembly comes back to town this year in 2020, our hopes are that there was no controversy surrounding the legislation. So we're hoping it's taken up this time. But the legislation is simply the same language that I guess you call it a carve out, but in the rules that govern engineering in North Carolina, there's a carve out that those rules don't apply to NRCS, their employees, or anybody that's granted job approval authority through the NRCS system. So we're looking for the same type language, except recognizing our state Soil and Water Conservation Commission and their job approval system, and anybody assigned job approval through that system. So that's basically one component of it that's still in flux. The other is the development of the JA system, and that has been a work of staff and a work group, and some of those things on the screen are what I've been sharing with some of our stakeholders on sort of the hurdles that we have to get over and things that we have to develop. The third prong to this approach is training, and we've been working through the partnership, and especially with our Association of Soil and Water Conservation Districts and their executive director, to try to come up with a training plan that'll sort of dovetail into the JA system, so that when we offer a new conservation practice, there'll be training already identified, already in place on when it's going to occur, who's going to teach it, and so district staff can basically see the roadmap of here's the conservation practice, here is the training and the path for me to get there. So it kind of helps them on their development on achieving certain goals. I guess I'd also just want to say that part of that training, and that's where we are up to our elbows right now, is we're working on a web-based training calendar that anyone can see, but that we can put on all training opportunities, whether it's mentor-based, whether it's formal classroom, whether it's online. But we're using the Department of Agriculture in North Carolina, their IT resources, to develop this online calendar so that people can really see what's offered. In addition to that is just coming up with a database for the Job Approval Authority. And we're trying to come up with a standardized curriculum for new employees. We're identifying Job Approval Authority needs by regions within North Carolina. And we're also trying to identify the needs of conservation employees across the state through surveying them. So this is sort of new to us, but there's been a clamoring from districts for years, and it sort of came to a head just about 14 months ago. So we've gotten our directive from the association to move forward with this. So it'll be an important piece to our professional development. And I guess if I can say just one more thing about the Job Approval Authority, is that it's going to be authorized by the state's commission, and it'll be applicable to all their state cost share programs, but it won't. It's not recognized by NRCS because it's not going to necessarily have every component that they require. However, anybody with NRCS approval will be recognized by the commission, so it'll be a one-way street that way. So the hope is to have a lot more folks with job approval authority and sort of decentralize a lot of our engineering and the practices that our commission does adopt. They'll be much more limited in scope, like a stream crossing, where if you're going to do a culvert type, the current NRCS standard lets you install pipes or make provisions for installing pipes, large enough to walk through. But the commission is going to adopt standards with much smaller pipes to limit the liability, and also the more complex projects will then be either farmed over to a professional engineer in the conservation partnership or someone with appropriate NRCS job approval authority. So that's what I had on that this morning.